You have gathered here because there is a question rising in your soul, a question that gnaws at the edge of your waking hours and enters into your dreams. You have called it love, and yet it has burned you. You have defended it, and yet it has hollowed you out. You have surrendered everything to it, and still you have left each encounter emptier than before. And so you ask, what is this force that has ensnared me, that felt like passion but left scars, that promised intimacy but delivered chains? It is not the arrows of divine union, nor the tender hand of true companionship. It is something far older, darker, and more subtle. It is the trauma bond, the repetition of the wound dressed in the mask of devotion. When I speak to you of this, I speak not from mere observation of the outer world, but from the archetypal depths of the human psyche. The trauma bond is not a modern invention, nor a simple psychological misfortune. It is an enactment of the eternal drama between the vulnerable child and the devouring parent, between the anima and animus corrupted by shadow, between the soul's longing for wholeness and the ego's fear of abandonment. You are not merely suffering a failed relationship, you are enacting one of the great mysteries of the unconscious. A binding ritual forged in pain and mistaken for love. The empath, that figure who lives with open nerves and unguarded heart, is especially prone to this snare. The empath believes that by absorbing the suffering of another, healing will emerge. Yet, what the empath does not see is that in their very act of absorption, they are reenacting the ancient wound of their own childhood. The moment when love and suffering were fused, when attention came only through sacrifice, when safety was bound to silence. And so, again and again, the empath mistakes the chains for embrace, the torment for passion, the predator for the beloved. I tell you, the day you awaken to this truth is the day you step across the threshold of your own unconscious. That day is terrible and holy. Terrible because you must admit that what you defended as love was, in fact, a reenactment of your bondage. Holy because you are finally capable of seeing what the self has been whispering all along. That love does not enslave, that union does not annihilate the soul, that intimacy does not require self-erasure. Consider a dream that many of you have dreamt in various forms. You find yourself in a house that is both your home and yet not your home. The rooms are dimly lit. You hear footsteps, and someone approaches. Their face is familiar, sometimes a lover, sometimes a parent, sometimes a stranger whose eyes pierce you. They take your hand, and it feels at first like affection, but soon their grip tightens. You try to pull away, but the harder you resist, the stronger their grasp. The dream ends with you either yielding in exhaustion or waking in terror. This dream is the unconscious image of the trauma bond. The house is your psyche. The figure is the amalgam of those you have loved and feared. The grip is the false intimacy that feeds on your compliance. Now, I ask you, where in your waking life does this dream play itself out? Where have you mistaken the iron grip for the embrace? Where have you surrendered your voice in the name of harmony, believing that silence would secure love? Where have you allowed your identity to be consumed, thinking that self-abandonment was proof of devotion? To see these questions clearly is to pierce through the veil of illusion that the trauma bond weaves. The archetype of the wounded child stands at the center of this drama. For the empath, the wound is not incidental, it is formative. From early in life, the child learns that survival depends on attuning to the moods of others, on absorbing the storms before they break, on becoming invisible when danger approaches. This adaptation, born of necessity, later masquerades as compassion. The empath says, I love deeply, I give endlessly, I endure faithfully, but beneath these virtues lies the shadow of fear. If I do not give, I will be abandoned. If I do not endure, I will be destroyed. If I do not love you at the cost of myself, I will not exist at all. Thus, the empath becomes the perfect partner for the narcissist, the wounded predator, the one whose own shadow seeks sustenance in the energy of another. This pairing is not accidental, it is archetypal. In myths across the ages, we find this dance. The maiden is captured by Hades and dragged into the underworld. The hero binds himself to the sorceress, who drains his strength. The devotee clings to the false idol that demands sacrifice but offers no true blessing. Each of these stories is a mirror of the trauma bond, the collision of open vulnerability with insatiable hunger. Yet let us not demonize either side of the bond, for the one who exploits is also trapped in their own shadow, bound by their own fear of emptiness, and the one who endures is also caught in the projection of their own unhealed wound. It is not about villains and victims, it is about unconscious forces colliding, about archetypes seeking resolution through the theater of human relationships. To awaken is not to condemn the other, but to reclaim the fragments of your own soul that you had entrusted to the bond. The moment of realization, the day you understand it was never love, is like standing before the abyss. You feel the collapse of the world, you constructed the shattering of the narrative that sustained you. Your body may shake, your mind may rebel, your heart may resist, for what you must admit is unbearable, that you gave your most sacred essence to a bond that did not honor it. And yet, paradoxically, this very shattering is the beginning of individuation. For the false God must fall before the true self can rise. You will find that your dreams change after this awakening. No longer will the familiar figure hold you in the dark house. Instead, you may dream of wandering alone through a vast forest. You may see animals guiding you, or hear distant music calling you deeper within. This is the psyche signaling that you are moving away from bondage into the wilderness of your own soul. It is lonely, yes, but it is holy, for in this wilderness you will encounter the archetype of the wise old man or woman, the inner guide who reveals that love is not the annihilation of self, but the flowering of it. In your waking hours, you will feel a strange emptiness. Where once the drama consumed your energy, there is now silence. At first, you will mistake this silence for loss, for the absence of love, but remain still, and you will hear another sound beneath it, the voice of your own soul, long muted, now beginning to sing. Again, this voice is quiet, patient, and true. It says, you are worthy of love without sacrifice. You are whole without another completing you. You are not condemned to repeat the wound unless you choose to remain blind. And 8. The trauma bond dissolves not merely by leaving the other, but by confronting the inner wound that created the bond in the first place. If you run from one partner only to find another who mirrors the same pattern, you have not yet descended deeply enough. You must face the shadow of your childhood, the archetype of the devouring parent, the false belief that you are only valuable when you suffer. This is the true work of individuation, to wrestle with the inner figures until they reveal their hidden gold, for within the wound lies the key to your destiny. I tell you, then, the day you realize it was never love is both a funeral and a birth. It is the funeral of the illusion that suffering is love, that silence is safety, that abandonment is inevitable. It is the birth of the self, the flowering of the soul that refuses to be consumed. Do not fear the grief of this funeral. It is sacred. Do not resist the terror of this birth. It is necessary, for only in passing through both will you find the wholeness that has always been your inheritance. When the empath begins to walk away from the ruins of the trauma bond, a silence descends that is almost unbearable. For so long, the psychic theater has been filled with noise accusations, reconciliations, subtle manipulation, desperate clinging, and the endless cycle of rupture and repair. This drama, though destructive, created the illusion of aliveness. When it ends, one feels the terrible void that lies beneath. Many mistake this void for the absence of love, but it is not so. It is the hollow cavern where the false bond once lived, and only by entering this cavern can the soul be reclaimed. To enter it requires courage, for the cavern is haunted by shadows. The empath, alone now, encounters memories long repressed, the childhood gaze that searched for safety but met coldness, the embrace that came only after tears, the voice that said, be good, be quiet, be useful, and then you will be loved. These ghosts rise up not to torment you, but to be recognized. They are the fragments of your psyche that were disowned so that you might survive, yet survival is not life. And so these fragments wait in the depths, pressing upon you with dreams, with symptoms, with the compulsions that drive you back again and again to the same destructive patterns. Do you see now why the bond was so intoxicating? It was not simply an attachment to a person, but a reenactment of the unfinished story of your soul. The psyche seeks completion. What was wounded seeks healing. What was split off seeks reunion. And so you were drawn to the one who mirrored the original wound, believing unconsciously that this time, if you endure, if you give enough, if you remain faithful, you will finally be loved without conditions. But the unconscious cannot heal itself through repetition alone. It requires illumination only by seeing the pattern for what it is, an echo of the past, not the truth of the present, can the spell be broken. This is why individuation demands that you turn toward the shadow. The shadow is not merely the dark impulses you wish to deny, it is also the unloved child, the silenced voice, the need you buried for fear of rejection. To meet the shadow is to say to yourself, I was not loved rightly, and yet I am worthy of love. I was wounded, and yet I am whole. The trauma bond teaches you to seek wholeness in the other, but individuation reveals that the self is already whole within you. You may dream in this stage of wandering through ruins. The buildings are collapsed, the streets empty, the air thick with dust, and yet, if you linger, you notice green shoots breaking through the stone, water bubbling from hidden springs, birds nesting in the cracks. This dream is the psyche's assurance that though the old structure has crumbled, life is emerging from beneath. What feels like devastation is in fact regeneration. In myth, this stage is mirrored in the descent of Inanna, the goddess who surrenders her jewels and garments at each gate of the underworld until she stands naked before her sister. The queen of shadows. Inanna is hung on a hook, left lifeless. Yet from this humiliation comes renewal. She is later revived and rises again, crowned anew. So it is with the empath who has been stripped of illusions. You, too, must pass naked through the gates of your own unconscious, surrendering each mask, each false belief, until you stand before your own shadow self. Only then can the resurrection of your authentic being begin. I tell you, there is a sacred anger that arises in this process. Many spiritual seekers fear anger, equating it with destruction, but anger, rightly integrated, is the fire that burns the ropes of bondage. When the empath realizes it was never love, it was control, it was fear, it was survival, and anger rises not against life itself, but against the lie that suffering is proof of devotion. This anger must not be directed outward in revenge, for that would entangle you again in the same cycle. Instead, it must be used to carve boundaries, to protect the garden of your soul, to say, no longer will I sacrifice my essence at the altar of false love. This is sacred fire, and without it, the empath will return again to the chains. The trauma bond is alchemical, material. What begins as lead, the heavy, poisonous weight of attachment, can, through awareness, become gold. But the alchemy requires that you endure the heat of the furnace, the dissolving of form, the confrontation with what is most feared, and in this process you will meet archetypes that both terrify and guide you the devouring mother who smothers under the guise of care the seductive animus who promises salvation but delivers only submission, the martyr who confuses suffering with holiness. Each must be seen, named and integrated, lest they rule you from the shadows. Integration does not mean annihilation. It does not mean you must destroy the part of you that longs to give, to nurture, to feel deeply. These are gifts of the empathic soul, but they must be wed to discernment, to strength, to self-respect. Otherwise, they become weapons turned against you. The child who gave everything for a scrap of affection must grow into the adult who says, I will give, but not at the cost of my essence. I will love, but not where love does not live. And there will come dreams of water, of rivers swollen with rain, of oceans vast and unending. Water is the symbol of the unconscious, and such dreams signify the flooding of emotions once repressed. You may weep without cause, rage without direction, laugh without reason. Allow it, for the waters that were dammed behind the trauma bond now rush free, washing away the debris of illusion. Trust that in time these waters will settle into a clear lake where reflection is possible, where the image of your true self can finally be seen. In waking life, solitude will become your ally. The empath, accustomed to defining themselves through others, may at first fear this solitude, mistaking it for abandonment. But solitude is not the absence of connection. It is the space where the self can emerge without distortion. It is here, in the quiet hours, that you will encounter dreams, insights, synchronicities, the subtle guidance of the unconscious. Guard this solitude fiercely, for it is the crucible in which your transformation is forged. And then, slowly, you will begin to notice new signs in your relationships, where once you tolerated disrespect, you now feel an instinctive recoil. Where once you explained away cruelty, you now name it for what it is. Where once you surrendered boundaries for the sake of peace, you now hold them with dignity. These shifts may frighten those who once fed upon your compliance, but they will attract those who honor your soul. This is how you know the alchemy is working, not only within your psyche, but in the outer world. The day you realized it was never love was the day the mirror cracked. But as you continue this journey, you will see that what shattered was not love itself, but the counterfeit. True love, the love that flows from the self, is not possessive, not demanding, not consuming. It is a force that nourishes both souls without diminishing either. And when, at last, you encounter this love, you will recognize it not by the intensity of drama, but by the depth of peace. As the empath continues on this inner pilgrimage, the question begins to stir. If it was never love, then what is love? And here the psyche hesitates, for to answer too quickly is to fall again into the same snares. Love, in its archetypal essence, is not the hunger of the abandoned child, nor the intoxication of the rescuer. Love is not the storm of projection, nor the sweet venom of dependency. Love, when revealed by the self, is the sacred union of opposites, the conjunctio that alchemists sought, the wholeness that does not demand sacrifice of one for the survival of the other. But before this truth can be embodied, the empath must pass through the crucible of grief. This grief is not merely for the partner who has been lost, but for the years spent in chains, for the innocence betrayed, for the energy poured into illusions. The grief is ancient, echoing not only your own childhood, but the collective wound of humanity, where generation after generation confuses bondage for love, where the sins of the parents are transmitted unconsciously to the children. To grieve, this is to allow the wound to speak, to honor the pain, rather than cover it with premature forgiveness or false positivity. Only by drinking the bitter cup of grief does the soul make space for a new wine. In dreams, this grief may appear as funerals, as rivers of tears, as endless rain. You may dream of holding the hand of the one you once loved as they turn to dust, or of walking through a field of withered flowers. These images are the psyche's way of showing you that something has truly died. Do not rush to replant. Do not force new blossoms to appear before their season. Let the earth rest. The soil of your soul must lie fallow, emptied of the weeds of illusion, so that the seeds of authentic love may one day take root. At this stage, the shadow becomes an even more insistent companion. You may feel impulses to return, to call, to re-enter the bond. You may rationalize that perhaps it was love after all, that perhaps you misunderstood. This is the voice of the wounded child, terrified of solitude. But if you pause and listen beneath that voice, you will hear another, the self, quiet but unwavering, saying, it was not love, it was fear. It was not union, it was captivity. Do not go back. The battle between these two voices is the battle of individuation itself, the pull of regression versus the call of transformation. Regression promises comfort, familiarity, the illusion of safety. Transformation demands risk, uncertainty, and the courage to face the unknown. The empath must learn to endure the tension between these opposites without collapsing into either extreme. This is the art of holding the opposite, which is the essence of Jungian psychology. For only by holding them can a third emerge, a new way of being that transcends the old dichotomy of bondage or abandonment. Here you may encounter the archetype of the divine child. Unlike the wounded child, who is bound by fear, the divine child represents the seed of wholeness within you, the innocent yet powerful essence that was never destroyed by trauma. This archetype appears in myths as the infant savior, the miraculous child born in darkness, the hero abandoned yet destined for greatness. When you feel even a flicker of joy in your solitude. When you hear within yourself a voice that whispers, "There is more for you than suffering." You are hearing the cry of the divine child. Protect this child, for it is the herald of your rebirth. You may also meet the archetype of the wise old man or woman, the inner figure who comes in dreams as a guide, a teacher, a mysterious stranger, offering counsel. Perhaps you dream of an elder who leads you to water, or a grandmother who hands you a key. These figures represent the wisdom of the self, showing you that you are not alone in the wilderness, that the unconscious is guiding you toward integration. Trust these messengers, for they appear when the ego is ready to receive guidance beyond its limited understanding. And then, slowly, the alchemical union begins to reveal itself. In alchemy, the great work culminates in the marriage of Sol and Luna, the sun and the moon, the masculine and the feminine. For the empath, this union is not first with another person, but within the masculine within you, your power, your boundaries, your voice must be reconciled with the feminine within you, your receptivity, your compassion, your intuition. For too long, these aspects have been divided. The empath over-identifying with the feminine, suppressing the masculine, and thus falling prey to those who exploit imbalance. But now the work is to restore harmony, to bring both into alignment, so that you may stand whole. At first, this inner marriage feels foreign. You may feel guilty for saying no, or uncomfortable with self-protection. You may fear that setting boundaries makes you cold, or that claiming your power makes you selfish. These are echoes of the old programming. Yet, as you persist, you will see that compassion without boundaries is martyrdom, and power without compassion is tyranny. True love arises only when these opposites are joined, when the heart is both open and guarded by strength, when the soul is both tender and sovereign. You will dream, perhaps, of weddings, of rings, of sacred rituals. You may see two rivers merging into one, or the sun and moon crossing paths in an eclipse. These dreams signify that the union of opposites within you is taking place, that the self is weaving harmony out of fragmentation. You will feel it in waking life as a new kind of stillness, a peace that is not dependent on another's approval, a joy that is not shattered by rejection, a strength that is not harsh but radiant. And it is from this wholeness that true love with another becomes possible, not the trauma bond, not the counterfeit passion of dependency, but the authentic union of two souls who meet as equals. You will recognize it because it will not demand your silence, nor consume your essence, nor punish your independence. It will honor your boundaries as sacred, just as you honor your partner's. It will not thrill you with chaos, but it will nourish you with peace, and you will see that what once you mistook for love was only the shadow's rehearsal, preparing you for the real. Yet I must tell you, this path is not without cost. For the empath who awakens will find themselves estranged from the old world. Friends may not understand why you no longer tolerate what you once endured. Family may resist your boundaries, accusing you of selfishness. Even the society around you, which thrives on manipulation and dependency, may view your wholeness as a threat. This is the loneliness of individuation. But remember, the self does not seek conformity, it seeks truth. And truth, though it isolates, also liberates. When you feel this isolation, turn again to your dreams. You may dream of climbing mountains, of walking deserts, of crossing seas. These are the symbols of the hero's journey, the inner path toward transformation. They remind you that solitude is not abandonment but initiation, that your journey is not meaningless but archetypal, that you are enacting the eternal drama of the soul's quest for wholeness. And so, the day the empath realizes it was never, love becomes not the end, but the beginning. It is the crack through which light enters, the wound through which healing flows, the threshold through which the soul steps into its destiny. You are no longer the child repeating the wound. You are the adult carrying the child to safety. You are no longer the victim of the bond. You are the alchemist transmuting pain into wisdom. You are no longer the echo of others' needs. You are the voice of your own soul, rising clear and strong. The final movement of this journey comes when the empath not only understands the illusion of the trauma bond, not only grieves the loss of what was mistaken for love, not only integrates shadow and embraces solitude, but begins to embody the archetypal destiny hidden within the wound. For the wound itself was never meaningless. The wound was the initiation, the bond was the threshold, and the awakening, that shattering realization that it was never love, is the opening of the gate to the larger mystery of the soul. You see, the empath's suffering is not wasted. What was endured in silence becomes the very foundation of insight. What was carried in secret becomes the wellspring of compassion. What nearly destroyed you becomes the initiation into the deeper mysteries of psyche and spirit. This is why so many who awaken from trauma bonds become healers, guides, visionaries, not because they sought such a destiny, but because the archetype demanded it. The descent into shadow, when endured consciously, always awakens latent powers. But here lies the danger: to confuse the destiny of healing with the compulsion of saving. The empath must discern between the archetype of the healer and the trap of the martyr. The martyr endlessly sacrifices self for others, mistaking self-erasure for virtue. The healer, by contrast, embodies wholeness and offers guidance without losing the self. This distinction is the fruit of individuation. To know that your light is not meant to be consumed, but to illuminate in dreams. This stage often appears as flight. You may find yourself soaring above landscapes freed from gravity, seeing from heights that once seemed impossible. Or you may dream of light breaking through darkness, of torches lit in caves, of stars shining in vast skies. These are the psyche's images of transcendence, showing you that what once bound you has been transformed into vision. In waking life, this vision manifests as clarity. You see patterns in others that once ensnared you, but now they no longer seduce. You recognize manipulation, but rather than reacting with fear or compliance, you observe it with a quiet knowing. You can extend compassion without surrendering your boundaries. And you can walk away without hatred. This is the mark of liberation. When the chains no longer tempt you, when the wound no longer dictates your choices, when the past no longer scripts your future. And yet, individuation is never complete. The psyche is a living mystery, and the archetypes will continue to unfold. Shadows will still arise. Wounds may still arc. Loneliness will still visit. But you will meet these not as a child enslaved, but as a sovereign soul capable of dialogue with the unconscious. You will no longer collapse into the trauma bond because you have recognized its mask. You will no longer mistake fear for love because you have tasted the peace of authentic connection. This, then, is Jung's truth about trauma bonds, that they are not random misfortunes, but archetypal enactments. They reveal where the soul has been wounded, where the shadow hides, where the self is calling for integration. To awaken from them is not merely to free oneself from a toxic relationship, but to step into the deeper drama of individuation, the sacred work of becoming whole. Love, in its true form, is not fusion born of fear, nor sacrifice born of desperation. Love is the dance of two whole beings, each rooted in the self, each honoring the other as a mirror of the divine. Love is freedom and intimacy intertwined, power and tenderness in harmony, silence and speech in rhythm. It does not consume, it nourishes. It does not enslave, it liberates. It does not repeat the wound, it heals it. And so I tell you, the day you realized it was never love was not the end of your story, it was the beginning of your true initiation. That moment of despair was in fact the threshold of destiny, for the self had been waiting behind every repetition, behind every tear, behind every betrayal, whispering, awaken. See, do not confuse the chains for love. Step into your wholeness. And now you stand at that threshold. The ruins of the old lie behind you. The wilderness stretches around you. The horizon glimmers ahead. You may still tremble, you may still grieve, but you are no longer blind. You are no longer captive. You are no longer the echo of a wound. You are the voice of the self, the child reborn, the soul awakening, and from this place, everything changes. Dreams will continue to guide you. Relationships will mirror your growth. Synchronicities will accompany your path. And though the world may not understand, though others may resist, though loneliness may still whisper, you will know within yourself a truth that cannot be shaken, that love is sacred, that you are whole, and that no bond forged in trauma can ever again define you. The day the empath realizes it was never love is the day they are reborn. And from that day forward, the soul begins to write a new story, not of chains and illusions, but of freedom, wholeness, and the eternal unfolding of the self